being recorded as part of our meeting, just so we have that officially out there. I'm going to share a slide presentation that I'm going to use to guide our conversation today. But by no means are we trying to just speak at you for 2 hours. So we've even broken it up to be able to have some questions and just get the dialogue going back and forth. And then we have a pretty good discussion we'd like to have at the end, just trying to make sure that we've got the mission right and that our path forward is sound. And we want to just make sure that we're all on the same page for that. So with that, I'm going to bring up my screen here and I will share it. So just give me one moment. So I am sharing a screen. And I will now share the PowerPoint. Okay, usually that's the hardest part of the meeting, so fantastic, it's behind us. So, as I was saying, we do have a brief slide presentation that we'd like to get through. Just as a reminder, I know people use all different types of platforms now for these virtual meetings. We are using GoToMeeting, and so there's just a couple of items here in case it's new to you. On the very bottom, you will see on your screen, sort of bottom to central, that there'll be some buttons like on the graphic on the bottom. And you can see that you can either turn your mic on or off. It looks like most people have it off, which is fantastic for background noise. Thank you for that. You can turn your cameras on and off if for some reason there's a delay or things are freezing up. Usually turning off your camera is the best thing to do. And then I'm using the share screen feature that we have. We also have an opportunity where you can raise your hand if you need to, or we're a small enough group, we may just say during the conversation, just take yourself off of mute and we can talk back and forth. Again, we are recording the meeting, so we're there, but the fact that everybody made it in so far seems that we're in good working order. Kristen, let me know if there's any technical difficulties. Riley's on the call as well. She may be able to help while we're presenting. So just to put that out there. So tonight is our first event together, our first meeting, and we have several more planned as we go forward. But for this evening, what we want to do is just get some background information out there so everybody has the same foundation. Talk a little bit about how the work that's going to be done here directly impacts the general plan. And then Jake Ross with HoCo is going to join me, and he's going to review some of the data and information that came out of the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, and specifically focused on our charge or our interest about this missing middle concept, and really just some other ideas and recommendations that came out of the plan that we want to consider as the general plan is developed. And then I'll ask Mary will join me, and we will talk about some of the community input that we've received so far, and specifically focusing that on items of housing that we thought this group should know about. And then we're going to show you where it's all stored and housed. And so if you want to do any reading up on your own of the specific summaries and the like, you can do that between now and the next meeting. And then we really want to focus a lot of our time on item number 5, which are the topics for the advisory group as we move forward, confirm we're on the right path and that we're all excited about what we're about to accomplish. And then as we had mentioned at the end, we want to confirm we have a schedule of meetings based on the polling that we've done and the like, and we'd like to get that on your calendars because we know everybody's busy right now. So starting with some background information, just again, so you know who's here and who are staffing it on the project team side. We have the project consultants, which again, my name is Matt Noonkester, and I'm the lead consultant, but we have, I think it's 12 members on our consulting team. So you may see all kinds of different faces from time to time, but we are the lead consultant, and I'm joined by Riley Timmons, who is also in our shop, and she's doing a lot of the day-to-day work with me, and I thank her for all of that. And again, Jake Ross is also with us with HoCo, and he'll be presenting specifically on some data findings and big ideas from the Housing Opportunities Master Plan that might inform some of our work for the general plan. And then on the Howard County DPZ side, we have Mary Kendall and Kristen O'Connor, who are the direct support staff for this group. And so either communications, back and forth, and the like will come from those two individuals.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Not to interrupt, I just wanted to take a moment to also introduce everyone to some of the other staff from both DPZ and other agencies who we work with very closely who have joined us today. And that's Brian Schefter. He is my fellow deputy director with DPZ. And then we also have Sarah Latimer, Kate Bollinger, and Kelly Simino, who's the director of the Department of Housing and Community Development. So if you're wondering who the other faces are, that's who is also joining us today. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you, Mary. Okay, so we also just want to make sure everybody else is comfortable and knows who else is in the room. And so we're going to ask if we can go around the horn here quickly and make some introductions of the actual advisory group members. And so again, we want to keep this pretty short, so we have a lot to talk about today. But if you could just let us know your name, what is your connection or experiences or your passion with housing within the county? Love to know whether you live, work, own property, all three within the county. And if you do represent a specific organization, if you could let us know that as well. But I'm just going to call on names in sort of the order that I have them. So in no particular order, I'm going to go through here. So Candace, can I start with you, please?
Sure. I can't tell if I'm unmuted on here. Am I unmuted?
Yeah, no, you're great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Candace Dodson-Reed, and my connection or experience is that I worked in the Ullman administration, and housing was one of the areas that I worked very closely with when I was Deputy Chief of Staff. And I live in Howard County and not representing any organization tonight. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Candace. Fran, could you go next, please? Fran, I can't hear you, but I do see that you're turned off. Is there either volume or looking on my end as well? Sorry, hold on. Let me see. Fran, can you try again? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Hold on.
Can we
Sure.
send her the call-in number by phone? Can she?
Yeah,
is there a telephone number?
Let's do that. Fran, I'm going to have you on hold for just a minute. Riley, can you send in the chat to everyone the call-in information, please, in case anybody else has audio issues as well? Bruce, let me go with you next while we're working on the issues for Fran.
Hi, it's Bruce Harvey. Can you hear me?
Yes, I've got you.
Okay. So my name is Bruce Harvey, and I am president and majority owner of Williamsburg Homes. Obviously, we've been in business since 1983 here in Howard County and some of the surrounding counties. I do both live and work in Howard County, and also a member of our trade association.
Hold on a second, Bruce. Bruce, go ahead.
Okay, so live and work in Howard County, and I am a member and Howard County chair of the Maryland Building Industry Association Howard County chapter. So I guess indirectly I represent them as well.
Fantastic. Welcome, Bruce. Thank you. Jacqueline, I think you're next in my window here. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you as well. Hold on. I have you shown as connected to audio. Can you try again with a test? Sorry, I'm not hearing you. Can we, if you, oh,
can you hear me now?
Yes, who is that? Is that Fran or Jacqueline?
Yeah, I think I fixed it. Anyway, I think I fixed it. If you'd like me to go while Bruce is figuring it out.
Yeah, please, Fran, go ahead.
Sorry. My name is Fran Lepresti, and I was the co-chair of the housing work group for the age-friendly initiative, where Howard County wants to become an AARP age-friendly county. So we just completed that.
Great.
And I represent any organization, and I'm retired.
I love it. Thank you. Welcome. Jacqueline, can we try again and see? I'm sorry, I still have the audio issue there. I apologize. Let me think. I'm going to try one thing on my end, but otherwise maybe just the call-in numbers in the chat box. Maybe we can try that as well. While you're calling in, Paul, I have you next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Hi, my name is Paul Casey, and I've spent my legal career as an affordable housing attorney working on projects across the country, but a good deal of my focus has been in Howard County. In Howard County, I served as the president of the Columbia Downtown Housing Corporation for a number of years in developing the Downtown Affordable Housing Plan. I also have served on the Housing Affordabilities Master Plan Task Force, as well as the Economic Opportunities Task Force, where I co-chaired the housing group. I'm a member of the Housing Affordability Coalition in Howard County, and currently I'm a member of the Howard County Housing Commission, where I serve as a commissioner. I don't know if any of those have asked me to represent them, but I'm glad to be a part of this. The work is very important. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Jacqueline, did you have audio now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect, thank you.
Okay, I called in from the phone, so I got off the computer. Sorry about that. So good evening, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Alexander, and my connection and experience in housing is my whole professional career is an affordable housing developer, originally from New York, relocated down here several years ago with my family. They had been down here before for the last 30 years. The vice president of a nonprofit real estate development organization, whose their Mid-Atlantic office is connected here. I do not do any county, but with Paul, I'm on the Howard County Housing Commission and active on some other organizations within Howard County, focusing, of course, on housing. So I'm not representing anyone right now, but I'm glad I could participate, and I'm a resident of Howard County. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Lisa, I have you next.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. So my name's Lisa Gavoni, and my connection and experience in housing is I work as the housing planner for the Montgomery County Planning Department, where I recently just transmitted the housing chapter of our general plan, Thrive Montgomery 2050, last month. So I have a lot of general plan experience, and I'm also project managing our missing middle housing initiatives currently. So a lot of cross-county pollination. I don't live in Howard County. I live in Silver Spring. And while I don't represent Montgomery County Planning Department here, I'll be speaking probably a lot about my experiences there because that's where my knowledge is from.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And then Paul, I've got you next. Paul Casey, sorry.
Sorry, Paul Casey was the one who went first, so it must be Paul Revelle.
I'm sorry, Paul Revel. I'm sorry. I apologize.
There are two calls. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
My name is Paul Revelle. I'm a local residential land developer. By that I mean Howard County only. I live and work in the county and own property here. And I play an active role with the Bruce Harvey's MBIA organization. And I'm also on the board of CHHI, a local nonprofit involved in affordable housing. And I'm active with Paul Casey and others with the Housing Affordability Coalition.
Great, welcome. And I have Allison.
Hi, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm driving.
Yeah, we've got you. Stay focused.
Okay. No, it's fine. I'm on Bluetooth. I'm Allison Del Zappo. I'm actually a realtor here in the county. I'm also a lifelong resident of Howard County, and I live in Columbia, so here I am.
Great, thank you. All right, well, great group, a lot of experience. I look forward to working with you very much. I think it's going to be fun. Let me continue here a little bit as we go through. Oh, sorry. I thought it might help a little bit if we gave some perspective of kind of what you've jumped into, right? Because the general plan's been going on for some time now.
Hey, I just want to say hi. I'm Josh Zucker.
Oh, Josh, I'm sorry. I didn't see.
I don't know. Sorry. I just want to say hi.
Yeah. I'm sorry about
I'm on
that.
the phone, so sorry.
No problem. It didn't show up on my feed.
Josh Zucker. Sorry to I'll let you get back to what you have to introduce. Josh Zucker. I was chair of the planning board for a few years, and I'm a member of Howard County for All, which is an affordable housing and economic opportunity advocacy group. Just looking forward to working with everybody and eventually seeing people on a GoToMeeting screen.
Thank you, Josh. I apologize about that. Anybody else that I missed?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Josh. And this is Sean Hughes. I'm a land use attorney down in Rockville. I grew up in Silver Spring, but been living in Howard County for 30 years. So our firm does a lot with Lisa in Montgomery County. I do a little bit of that. She's probably more familiar with Jody Klein from our office. And Summer Cross was one of our experts. She just left to go work for the county, so it's a good pickup for the county. But it was good to hear Lisa on because I've done, we do a lot of work with Montgomery County. I think they do a great job on this type of area, and I'm glad to be, as a resident, I'm glad to be involved in this group. And I was a little bit late, so my apologies. Thank you.
Not a problem at all, Sean. Thank you. Is there anybody else? Josh and Sean, I have you on my list now. Is there anybody else I missed that I just didn't see?
Sherman is coming. He is just delayed a couple seconds, so you're going to see him pop up any minute.
Okay.
But he said continue on. He's coming.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, in the interest of time, I will carry on, but we'll do a delayed introduction here in a minute. But again, this project's been going on for some time. You've been inserted into it in a very critical part, but I just thought I'd give you an overview of what we've done and where we're going. So we actually started way back in 2020, early 2020, had what are called our general guidelines, which are kind of the rules and the framework we're going to follow. That was in the middle of 2020, and we've been busy ever since. And so you can see here, we just kind of blew up on the most recent months that are within our planning process. Just a few months ago, we've kind of unveiled some planning themes, and we're working through and letting those kind of mature and get ready for further publication. Some of you may have participated in what was called our Growth Choices Workshop, or our scenario planning, where we put out different futures and different paths the county may go down, and we solicited some reaction, and I'm going to go over some of that here in a minute. So I'll leave it brief here. And next week, we'll be starting out what's called our New Town Planning Framework. For those of you who have interest in the Columbia area, whether because you're there or just a county resident who's interested in it, we'll be starting some discussions about some the preferred character, the design, the feel, the sense of what Columbia is in the Newtown zoning areas. And so that'll be kicking off next week. And then ultimately, the information, the input that you all have will be put in this time period right now. And in August, we'll be sharing the thoughts and ideas that come out of this group with other stakeholders and groups that are involved in the planning process and the development process. And then ultimately, in August, we'll be going back out to the public with a lot of these big ideas for some additional feedback. And then once we're done with that, we'll go into document writing, which will be the end of summer into fall. And we're hoping to pre-file in January of 2022 to start the adoption process. So still plenty of time to have your fingerprints on this and really influence where we go. But there is an end in sight, and we do have very deliberate ways we're going to use the information that we collect from you. Now, for this group specifically, it's a strategic advisory group. And again, your focus is on housing and neighborhoods and the missing middle concepts we want to talk about. We have three goals for you as part of this process. One is we wanted to get together a group of experts who have a lot of history working in the area, but also have a perspective beyond the borders, whether it's state or national, who can really give us some new ideas. And we want to focus on this missing middle concept. We want to work collaboratively. We're going to come up with different improvements or ideas or opportunities, whether it's policy or design related, that might be furthered within the general plan as a recommendation and then picked up later in things like zoning amendments or other policies or funding priorities or incentives that come out of the general plan as a policy recommendation. Ultimately, we will come back with the thoughts and the ideas that come out of this group. We're going to bring them back to a 34-member planning advisory committee that we have. And that's a group of individuals who have been meeting with us since October of last year and continue to meet with us regularly. And they're our sounding board and have some very specific responsibilities and assignments in terms of getting the general plan across the finish line. And your information will be shared with them as they have to make some decisions about future land use and some infrastructure systems and the like. We want your information to be shared with them for that. And so our approach to this project as a whole, as well as the work we're going to do with you as an advisory group, tries to combine the strengths that we all have. And so the community input, we're going to share with you things that we've collected and heard so far through our planning process. Any input you have in terms of voicing concerns, opinions, and the like, that will be in our community input bucket. And then we are collecting some data and analysis. Jake's going to share some of it now. We do have the advantage that the Housing Opportunities Master Plan is a recent document. It's got a lot of good, fresh, current ideas in it. And so we'll be able to lean on that heavily. And then there'll be best practices that either we share or you share, given all the experiences that you all have, in order to address the challenges and opportunities that we have in front of us, thinking out for the next 20 years and the future of Howard County. Where those three things overlap, meaning we've heard sentiment in the community that has a desire or interest in something, there's data and analysis that supports a sound decision to move forward, we have good standing, or some new ideas that we have, where all that starts to overlap is where we're going to try to write the plan. And so that's kind of our approach that we've had for the entire general planning process and what we're going to try and do for this advisory group as well. So I don't want to take for granted that everybody's just really up to speed on what a general plan is. So I wanted to provide just a little bit of background of what we're doing so you know how you're going to fit into the process. So first and foremost, somebody challenged me for how many words I could fit on a slide. I think I've met the challenge here, right? I'm not going to read it to you, but there are a couple of key points when you define what a general plan is. First, it's the official adopted statement for growth and development in Howard County. So this is the place you go if you want to hear from the county's point of view where it wants to see growth or conservation for the next 20-year planning horizon. The recommendations that come out of this document get implemented in other master plans or ordinances or budgets, but the general plan is what sets sort of the policy, and we're trying to make a more predictable future for everybody so they kind of know what's coming and they can count on it, whether it's for investments, for private development interests. They want to know kind of what the expectations are of what and where. And then this idea of returns on investments to make sure the things we're doing all are complementing each other and moving us towards a common vision. And then finally, we do have a 20-year horizon when we're looking at a general plan, and we're looking across all topics at one time, which then by nature means this document in some ways is broad. There are some issues or studies that have to be done that are more detailed that are needed for implementation beyond what the general plan will do. And so sometimes the general plan is just setting us up for the next step in the process. And so we'll talk about that as well. There have been 6 general plans before this one for the county, going all the way back to 1960. And you can see that each of them have kind of taken on a charge as you go through time. And you can see in the early years, it was just kind of about getting organized, trying to identify and just make sense of where infrastructure was going to go and those kind of things. By the time you got to the 1990 timeframe, growth was widespread and rapid. And so we started to think about, how you might manage the timing and intensity of development to sync up with available capacity and infrastructure and other things. And then you can see starting in 2000, they've moved into more of the sustainability initiative. And that's been the drive for the last 2 plans. For the Howard County, the HoCo by Design plan that we're doing, we're respecting and honoring all that's been done before us, but we're also focusing a lot on the physical organization of the county. We're recognizing kind of where you're at in your growth curves, starting to have some broad statements about design and character that can be picked up in other documents. So we're trying to move the torch and carry it forward from the previous plans. Like I was telling you before, the general plan is sort of a broad document, but where it is in the process, it has a lot of impact, the things that we talk about. And so you see on the left-hand side, if you have the general plan and you move to the right, it affects a lot of different things that occur within Howard County. It will have impact and direct impact on capital budgets and annual budgeting because it'll take direction from what the general plan said to do moving forward. There will be other plans that are created from this, whether it's a very specific master plan, whether it's the zoning plan like I talked about, or something else. It will always go back to the vision and framework from the general plan for which it was being created for. And then all of the regulations that go with Howard County, whether it's zoning or land development, also take their cue from the policies and the directions set forth in the general plan. So while sometimes we might not get down to the level of detail that some people want before to solve an issue or take advantage of an opportunity, the things that are in this general plan, its ripple effect, are incredible. And so we want to take it very seriously and make sure that we kind of get ourselves in the right direction moving forward. The other thing that we like to recognize with this general planning process is when you want to see implementation occur, or you want to see change, or you want to drive by something and say, oh, I like what that is, or I like how we got there, we have to recognize that what the local government does in its general plan and its implementing ordinances and policies and budgets is only one part of what gets us to that end game. And so when we're coming up with recommendations, we do have to have property owners who are willing to either want to develop or embrace the type of recommendations being done. There needs to be a market for it. If there's not a market for it, it makes it awfully hard for the developers to make the pro forma work and to have it pencil out. And then there has to be the interest of the development community to want to build that type of either land use or development or density type patterns. And then the lending community, believe it or not, has a lot of control over this, because if the developer can't get the financing for the project, it never gets off the ground. And so when we're thinking about all of these different systems that are working for change, we have to recognize where the government falls within that system and how it might be able to partner or influence some of the others that are going on. Now, for any of you who have been part of past general plans, you know that again, there was that rapid growth that was occurring, and then the sustainability initiatives. In this process, we're also recognizing that in many ways, the county is built out. You may not think it as you drive around the county, but 39% of the land area has been open space. Oh, I'm hearing an echo. If somebody can mute, I'm just trying to see who might. Oh, I think we're good. The county is largely built out, and so we only have about 2% of the land that's actually undeveloped and unprotected. And so that shifts the mindset a lot for what we're doing with this general plan, from a more suburban mindset to a more redevelopment, infill development, or even in some places a very urban type approach to concentrating growth in certain areas and what it might produce in terms of opportunities or challenges moving forward. So we are in a state that's different than has been in any other general plan before, because we've kind of run out of room for the first pass at land uses and densities. And now we need to come back and look for those strategic opportunities for this general plan. Now, all of you, because you have direct ties to the county, this is no surprise to you, but actually Jake and his team over at HoCo had prepared some demand numbers for us. And these are demands irrespective of whether there's room to accommodate it or not, but this is kind of what is the potential if the county wants to plug into it. And you can see they're forecasting over a 20-year period, there could be more than 30,000 new homes that would love to come to Howard County if they are able to. And in fact, they went a step further and said, because of either policies or land scarcity in the past, there's even 20,000 more that would love to come here if there was a way to do it. And that's the key question, if there was a way to do it. There's also employment that will be coming here, as well as retail and hotel rooms. But for this group, I really wanted to focus on the housing that we have coming forward, and we'll let Jake go into the details on it here very soon. So with that, Jake, I'll advance your slides for you, but I'll go ahead and let you present your information now.
Great, thanks, Matt. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks everyone for being here today. This topic is obviously really important, and so I'm hoping that the information here will make for an interesting discussion later on. And so getting started, I know I see some familiar faces on this call, but for those of you who aren't aware, as Matt said, a separate plan, the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, has been going on at the same time as the general plan, but really with the singular focus of identifying strategies to improve housing opportunities for all residents of Howard County, both existing and future. We wrapped up a lot of that process last month and look forward to sharing the final plan with everyone soon. But in the meantime, what we wanted to do was pull from some of that research for today's conversation, centered specifically around missing middle housing. And as I'm sure
state trial for aiding and abetting murder for the first. That state trial now scheduled for next March.
Okay, sorry, I muted. We're good.
It's okay. And so, as I'm sure people on this call who are familiar with the process, like I know Kelly and Paul are here, can attest, the actual plan is a lot more wide-ranging than just missing middle housing, and it proposes a number of other housing-related recommendations. But today we wanted to really focus on the information and the recommendations that relate specifically to missing middle housing, both because, one, it's the topic we're all here today to discuss, and two, it's also one of the topics that the general plan has the potential to be the most impactful for, because it's something that really does relate very closely to land use policy. And so before I begin, what I wanted to do was just clarify and make clear what I mean by when I say missing middle housing. In recent years, a large portion of new housing development, both nationally and in Howard County locally, has really concentrated on two ends of the spectrum. On one hand, you have large single-family homes in suburban settings, and on the other hand, you see smaller apartments, often in urban settings. And we think of missing middle housing as something that really helps bridge that gap. And so along with that comes lots of other forms of for sale housing, things like duplexes, triplexes, stacked flats, forms of housing that offer more space than an apartment and less space than a larger detached home. And because of that, are able to remain more broadly affordable to a wider number of households. And so, Matt, would you mind skipping to the next slide?
Yeah, I got you.
So digging into the data, we see that this type of housing is really critical in Howard County. One of the first things that we did at the start of the Housing Opportunities Master Plan last, probably April, was do a lot of research on supply and demand. Looking at specifically in this graph here at for sale housing, but we did it for rental housing as well. But focusing on this for sale supply and demand curve, we see an interesting story, which is pretty clearly demand is following supply, which essentially means that because most of the for sale housing development happening in Howard County tends to be larger and higher end right now, most of the people who are moving here to purchase homes also tend to be higher income. And so the lack of housing at attainable price points right now is oftentimes preventing a lot of middle income households from purchasing housing here. And when I say middle income, it's important to note that those incomes are still really high. At the end of the day, that 80 to 120% of AMI in the region still translates to a family of four making $100,000, $110,000 a year, which is a lot of money, and it's still only enough to purchase right now, according to this research, 1 in 4 homes that exist in the county today. That affordability research, that affordability issue, if left unaddressed, has the potential to just grow more and more severe over time. And that's because a lot of the new for sale housing development happening right now, so isolating what's already here, really is primarily targeted to households making more than 120, sometimes even 150% of AMI. And meanwhile, most of the housing that's affordable to households that are making less than this amount is older. And that means that, as Matt said, since we're in kind of a redevelopment growth scenario in a lot of places, each time that you take away a home that's older, smaller, more affordable, and redevelop it or tear it down, it means there's also one fewer housing unit for the households that formerly occupied it. These issues aren't because Howard County's housing inventory isn't diverse. It actually is really diverse, in part because of how it developed, starting with Columbia and expanding outwards. But rather, it's because new development today isn't always reflecting that diversity. While Howard County actually does have a really good mix of large homes, medium-sized homes, smaller homes, most new development really primarily includes just large single-family detached homes, large townhomes, and rental apartments. And so even though looking specifically at those first three columns in that, oh, sorry, Matt, would you mind going back just one? Even though single-family homes less than 3,000 square feet, which are the second and third columns, represent almost half of the for-sale housing inventory in Howard County, they're together just 17% of the new homes that are being built today. Now, if you'll go on to the next slide, please. And that dynamic is really a result of two things. And one is when supply is unable to keep up with demand, new development is often pushed towards higher income segments. But two, the new homes being built in Howard County tend to be larger and therefore more expensive than the new homes that are being built elsewhere. That's not always by coincidence. In a lot of cases, it's related to the locations in which that new development is happening, as well as the zoning policies that are guiding development in those locations. And so when we did this analysis looking at new homes that were available for sale, we saw that single-family detached homes in Howard County were 36% larger and 36% more expensive than those in Anne Arundel County, as well as 16% larger and 40% more expensive than those in Baltimore County. And a similar gap, albeit a slightly narrower one, also existed on the townhome side, suggesting the difference here really extends just beyond detached housing as well. And since new housing development has favored those larger and more expensive homes in a lot of cases, prices have also risen a lot. The share of homes taking place at price points above $500,000, which is technically affordable to a household making 150% of AMI in Howard County, has increased from around 28-29% in 2010 to more than 40% in 2018. And at the same time, the share of home sales taking place at price points below $350,000 has decreased by roughly the same amount. And that points to rising affordability challenges in the county, which is part of the reason why this missing middle housing topic is so critical to discuss as part of this plan. And so honing in on that $350,000 price point from the previous page, there really is a big difference between what you can afford in Howard County and what you can afford elsewhere. In most places, the homes that you can afford at these price points are both larger and newer, and there's also a lot more of them. And so when we did this analysis earlier, we saw almost half as many townhomes available at these price points in Howard County compared to Anne Arundel County and Baltimore County, and about 1 in 5 of the number that were in those places in the case of single-family detached homes. And we've done a lot of talking here about affordability, but it's important to note that affordability also has a lot of impacts on the household base. Given the type of housing that exists in Howard County, it can often be difficult for middle and lower income households to find housing in the community, which is part of the reason for that supply and demand trend that we walked through earlier. But the same is also true looking at age trends. Comparing Howard County to other nearby counties, you see that it tends to have fewer both younger and older households relative to those other jurisdictions. And those are two groups of people that really would benefit from having more missing middle housing options available to them. But missing middle housing also has benefits that really extend beyond just future households. The existing household base in Howard County is aging. And as that happens, housing needs and preferences are also changing. In particular, there's already been a lot of growth in the 55 plus population, as you can see in this graph, which really is only expected to continue moving forward given the age curve of Howard County. Providing those households with more age-appropriate housing options for them to downsize into if they want or need to is really critical to ensuring that all those households can continue to remain and take place and take part in this community. But the same also goes for younger households too. When we did the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, during our outreach, we heard a lot of concern about whether or not people who are currently growing up in Howard County would one day be able to afford to purchase homes in 5, 10, 15 years. And missing middle housing is another way of providing a benefit to helping create housing opportunities for those households as well. And so with that research in mind, as I said, there was a lot more that went into the full Housing Opportunities Master Plan. One of the things that we did was develop a set of mini recommendations to help improve housing opportunities broadly in the county. And what I wanted to do right here was pull out a handful of those, I think there's 5 total, that relate either to missing middle housing specifically or housing attainability more broadly, just to give you a sense of some of the things that we're recommending as part of the Housing Opportunities Master Plan and to set the stage for future conversation about how we can potentially think about these coming into play. And so the first one here is a really key recommendation, which is to allow a broader range of housing types to proceed by right. And so again, examples that we've suggested there could include things like cottage clusters, townhomes, other forms of attached single-family homes, various types of missing middle housing that right now what we've seen is that land use policy has essentially discouraged in certain places housing diversity from occurring. By enabling those to move forward by right, it does the opposite and actually encourages the market to provide those opportunities for people. And so the second one here is providing the regulatory flexibility to increase opportunities for ADUs. Current regulations allow for ADUs in Howard County, but there are a lot of restrictions on the location, the structure they can take, and the usage of these units too, which although not always a form of missing middle housing, is something that can serve a similar effect in terms of providing people with more age-appropriate housing options. This is something we heard a lot in our outreach, was making sure that you could provide an in-law suite for parents or grandparents to move into, and basically give people more age or budget appropriate housing options for them. The third recommendation here is minimizing de facto barriers to housing stock diversification. This isn't unique to Howard County. This is something that you will see nationally. But in a lot of places, zoning regulations may actually allow certain types of housing, but there's other sorts of restrictions that make it functionally very difficult to provide those types of housing. And so an example that our policy expert in the Housing Opportunities Master Plan put forth was that a zone might allow something like a duplex to proceed on a by right basis, but there's other restrictions on things like height or parking or coverage that make it impossible to actually provide that duplex in practice. And so keeping those types of differences in mind is especially important when we're thinking about these things moving forward. If we do want to do more by right housing here, think about ways that we can encourage this production. And so the fourth recommendation here that I've pulled out is to determine if there are strategic locations in the rural west and in other lower density portions of the planned service area where it's feasible to accommodate increased development while still balancing other priorities for things like water and sewer capacity, historical context, and broader preservation goals. And so the point of this recommendation here is to identify if there's strategic locations where we can really provide housing that might be a little bit more dense than what's there today. And that's not to say that that needs to take place everywhere in the county, but just evaluating whether this is something that we can do in order to help open up housing opportunities in places where they haven't historically existed. And we mentioned the Rural West here, and this was something that we talked about quite a lot with the Housing Opportunities Master Plan Task Force, just given some of the differences that we see in terms of housing opportunities that exist to various types of households on either side of the service line. And the fifth one there is updating MIHU rules and fee structures with the goal of producing more units throughout the county that are integrated within communities. Although not necessarily related specifically to missing middle housing, this does have a lot of impacts on attainability. And this isn't to say that that we want to. What this is essentially meaning is making sure that when communities are including MIHUs, they have the necessary flexibility to ensure that they can provide them on site. And so what that really means is making sure that the types of zoning categories that enable that type of production to take place are across a wider area, and that there's necessary zoning flexibility to really accommodate that type of growth if it's necessary. And so with that, I think, Matt, is it time to pass back to you for a question and answer for everyone?
I was going to say, yeah, I'll take it back. And thank you, Jake. It was a lot of information, but I thought it was presented very simply, which is great. Helps me understand. I want to stop here for everybody and see if you have comments, questions, reactions, given your backgrounds, maybe some stories that go around the data. But I want to give you a chance to, react to this and ask questions while we have access to Jake.
Hey, Matt, it's Kelly. I just wanted to point out, I recently visited a new community, Cedar Creek in Columbia, and the townhomes for market rate are.
Oh, Kelly, hold on. We lost you here. I had the beginning. Hold on. Kelly, hold on. Let's see. Kelly, hold on. Hold on. Audio. Kelly, can you hear me?
Am I better? Better?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Sorry. So you had visited Cedar Creek, yes.
Cedar Creek.
With the townhomes, and you were looking at the price points and things you were talking about, correct? Can you just recap from there?
Yeah, so it was the market rate are $600,000.
Yeah.
And the MIHU price is $369,000. So we're going to have about 19 units there, but $600,000, family's going to need to make well over $100,000 to qualify for a market rate home. So I just wanted to point that out for the group, that that's a current example of how expensive our housing is becoming.
Great. Thank you, Kelly.
Matt Sherman Howe.
Hey, Sherman.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, gotcha. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mary. Sorry to be a little bit late, Mary, but the food was a little bit better than I thought it was going to be. But the thing that is very important, I think, to me, struggling families and Black families, is the value system. The value system, and to what extent are the housing that we're pointing out reflects the value system that we have here in Columbia and Howard County. And you all know a lot about it now through Jim Rouse. Jim Rouse said this was the place for people to grow, not just for people, but for people to grow. Now, I started off over in Stephen Forest, Oakland Mills, beautiful village, in a Williamsport style home, very, very nice style home. Well, later on, of course, my wife wanted to get a rancher, and to get a ranch in Columbia required a larger lot. So naturally, I had to move. But guess what? when I moved, my daughter came into Hoppers Choice Middle School, and she ended up in Centennial High School, and of course she ended up in Dartmouth College, and then Columbia College for graduate school. That's that growth that we're talking about, and a lot of that had to do with us being able to afford to get here. And many of the Black families here are families of soldiers out of Fort Meade. They came here and they populated Howard County, and they caused Howard County to grow too at one particular point. In fact, Black families earn more than white families in Columbia. So I'm not saying you'd have a met to diversification, but I wanted to let you know that we are focused on it on the value system, and to that extent we are assessing the plan. Does it do what we before we came out here? Does it and this also affects white families too, but does it do what we had hoped that it would do before we came out here? So again, our eyes are on the housing as it upholds the value system. And I know I'm talking about Columbia, but I think most Howard counties like the Jim Rouse value system. So I wanted to point that out because it has been pointed out to me by Blacks in this community, whites too, you know. So you got to go by the value system. I said, oh yeah. Now I'm beginning to understand what you are talking about. I mean, what the crowd that calls me is talking about. So I think you headed in the right direction for that matter. Thanks.
Thank you, Sherman.
Hi, it's Candace. I just have one quick comment. This presentation is very helpful and I think it's excellent, and the recommendations are certainly excellent. And, you know, it's going to require, I think what we come up with is going to require some creativity and innovation, certainly. I think the bigger issue that we sometimes have in this community is how to articulate this and how to communicate the need, or maybe we have done that and we just have a lot of NIMBYs, but communication will be an important piece here. You know, it's not shocking, and we can probably name the names of the folks who are anti any kind of development in Howard County, regardless of the need or the demand. And so I think that will be an important piece as well as we think about this and as we go through this process, you know, sort of how are we going to communicate this in a way where people can understand, because housing is complex. This doesn't feel complex to me, but housing is complex to some. And there's that anti-developer sentiment that that drives me crazy in our county.
Understood. Thank you, Candace.
And Matt and Jake, this is Paul Casey. I just wanted to add, following up on what Candace and Sherman said, we began with your explanation of what the Housing Opportunities Master Plan surveys and work concluded, which was that there's this extraordinary pent-up demand and anticipated demand of over 50,000 units of housing in our county. And I think what we need to tie in order to make it understandable and politically acceptable is that there is no way for the county to continue growing unless we supply this missing middle. And one of the things that I took away from the work on the Housing Opportunities Master Plan was that if we expect people to be able, as Sherman did, to move from one housing opportunity to another housing opportunity in the county, we need to have housing units available at all levels. People are not going to be able to move up or move into other homes if they've never had an opportunity to start. And we need to be able to find ways to make sure that we have a vital, continually dynamic housing opportunities. So I think the statistics show that there is a need that we cannot be blind to. And if we help people understand that this allows everyone in the community to benefit, it allows jobs to come in, it allows us to have the taxes which support the services we want, but it also allows our children and grandparents to stay. The last point I want to make is, this wasn't mentioned, and I just want to make sure that we include this in what we're doing over the next few months, but I'm assuming we don't just identify areas of the strategic where there can be growth, where there's limited growth now, like in the rural West. But aren't we willing to consider, as part of our discussion, the expansion of the planned service area of the public utilities, so that if need be, we can, in fact, expand growth into areas if we have to? I assume that's on the table.
It has been on the table, and actually later in the presentation, I'll hit on that a little bit. So,
okay, thank you.
No problem.
I would just like to say, if I can, just a few notes from the senior community, and that is that, as you said, 1/3 of the county is greater than age 50, and that proportion will continue to increase, and I don't believe it's linear, if I remember correctly. What we found out was 70% of seniors would like to stay in their home if they could. So there's a whole thing about how do we do that and how do we modify, and that's beyond the scope of this group. But they also want choices. For example, they may not want to move into a duplex with 2 stories. They might want to have the cottage type situation where there are 1-story houses next to each other with a garage, which is much smaller than what they had. What often may happen to seniors is that if there's a spouse who dies, then your income may immediately be cut by quite a bit because of Social Security. And so there's a need to move, and many of our seniors are moving to other counties. So I would say that I think this is great, because I think we're missing the middle of seniors as well as the rest of the age group. I think it's all in there, it's the same. They just need a little bit more special type of housing. Not everybody wants to move into a condo. Not everyone can afford a 55+ community, and not everyone can afford to go to someplace like Vantage House for continuing care. So I'm all for the missing middle, but it needs to be very likely 1 story for seniors. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Any last comments or questions? We're going to have another discussion period here coming up very shortly. So anything that has to do with the data Jake presented or a question? Otherwise, I'm going to move on just in the interest of time, but we've got additional opportunities to have these good conversations.
Yeah, and I think do we still have Josh and Sean on the phone?
Yes, I'm seeing
I'm still here.
Or 2, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, just feel free to chime in if you need to. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, well then let's go into the next section that we have here. And we've showed you the data, the numbers, right, from that diagram we had earlier. Now we want to share with you some of the community input that we've heard so far. And Mary and I are going to co-present this, so I'll let her start, just kind of an overview of some of the thoughts and ideas we've been hearing from the community.
Yeah, so actually I don't have everything that is in this section has already been shared with the group. So I'm just going to quickly go through these slides. But basically, in addition to the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, the need for missing middle has been identified through the HoCo by Design planning process and previous county efforts. But if you want to read about all of the community input we've received to date, is now posted on our website on our public engagement page at HoCo by Design. It also shows which engagement activities are on the horizon. And next slide. And one pretty significant initiative that we've took on as a part of HoCo by Design is we've done a lot of outreach to increase representation from diverse populations throughout the county. And we facilitated about 15 focus groups and talked to about 100 participants from various racial and ethnic groups, such as the Chinese American Parents Association, Indian Cultural Association, and NAACP. We talked to students from high schools, talked to members from the Horizon Foundation Council, talked to individuals with disabilities, and also spoke with both renters and low to moderate income residents. And next slide, Matt. And basically just what we heard is that, you know, this need for missing middle housing is throughout the entire county. It's applicable to everyone. And people want to see housing that's affordable to people of all economic backgrounds, in addition to a desire for socioeconomically diverse communities. And just a few notable quotes that we heard throughout our process, it's okay, for example, affordable housing should be located convenient to affordable and needed amenities. Additionally, putting density close to small businesses will help support those businesses. And we need housing for first-time home buyers and people starting in their career. Next slide. Just to sort of try to map exactly where we have concentrations of lower cost versus higher cost housing throughout the county. We put this map together, and it shows where the location currently of multifamily buildings are, both apartments and condos, and single family attached and single family detached neighborhoods. And what we see, I think, on this map is that there is greater racial and ethnic diversity where we have a variety of housing types, which I'm sure is no surprise to anyone. Next slide, please. Thank you. No, that's perfect. And I know, Fran, you could speak to this. You already spoke to this. So, because you were just the co-chair of the housing committee for the Howard County's Age Friendly initiative. But this is also important for us to keep in mind that we do have an aging population that is growing. And Fran already mentioned with regards to what percentage of our county is over the age of 50, but specifically this is a statistic related to the population over the age of 60. So 21% of the county currently is over the age of 60, and it's projected to grow to 28% by 2045. And next slide, which Fran already articulated in terms of what 28% of our, soon to be 28% of our population wants in terms of housing moving forward in the future to stay here. Next slide. And then it's back to you, Matt, if you want to talk a little bit about what we heard from the Growth Choices workshop.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mary. And the whole, all of the comments we've gotten so far have been great. And a lot of them on housing have really shaped or made impressions on what we're doing. And we'll continue to share information with you as it comes in from other engagement opportunities and activities that we have. But I told you we just recently completed what we called the Growth Choices workshop. And there were some decision points that were presented there that really have a direct correlation to what you're going to be doing as the housing group. And so I wanted to highlight some of those for you this evening, and then invite you, if you go back to the HoCo by Design website, there's a data tab at the top. And if you go to scenario planning, there's an entire book that's written on this if you want to go check it out later. But for right now, I'm going to stick to the highlights. But again, a lot of information that I think can guide some of the discussions that we have here. So for any of you who weren't involved, we ended up presenting 4 futures for Howard County, and they ranged in terms of kind of less change and less intensity to more change and more intensity. And ultimately, what we're doing right now is we're asking for reactions to those things, and we identified 8 key decision points that we feel the county has in front of them as they plan out their next 20 years. And so what we're doing now, from now till August, is kind of taking the lessons learned from that exercise, as well as the advisory group's input and the like, to create a hybrid scenario. So it's not like one of these scenarios was going to be the winner as a selection process, but we were going to learn from each of the stories that they presented and then combine them into what might be the best future or the way the compass should point for this general plan. So as part of that, and again, I invite you on the HoCo by Design website, all of this in detail is provided, but we had 222 different people who participated in a virtual meeting in a format similar to what we're having right now. 388 people went on what we called a story map and took an online survey as information was presented to them. 536 people have already downloaded the book, the Scenario Planning Guide, to read, and we got almost 1,700 different comments on that. And again, a lot of those comments had to do with housing, either things people liked, didn't like, or would like to see more of or less of. And so I wanted to share some of those with you this evening for our discussion about kind of honing in on exactly what this group wants to accomplish over the next couple of months. So the first decision point that was raised was all about new and different housing options. And actually the image that you see, Fran, it goes a little bit to your point about different formats of homes. All of those drawings there are duplexes, but some of them are side by side, more like a ranch single style. Some of them are actually adjacent and next to each other, so you can have entrances on the left and the right, but it looks like a larger home. And at the top image, you see where you actually stack the units, and you have an entrance from the front and an entrance from the side. And so as we're looking at these different housing types that might be desirable within the county, we're also trying to think about their character and context and how they might fit into the overall look and feel of the county as well. So as part of that, one of the questions we had asked was what type of housing is needed in the county moving forward? And as you can see, all of it is kind of what we heard back from the community. So you can see there are a lot of missing middle, looking at it more from a formatting standpoint. So regardless of price, looking at like quadplexes, so 4 units in a building, and then triplexes, duplexes, and the like, and townhomes. They all had a lot of interest. But we also still had things like apartments and condominiums as well. And so as we're looking at this, we're going to challenge you to think about all these different housing opportunities that might be appropriate in the county, because from what we found from this sample size, there's a lot of interest in all different kinds of housing. So the variety is really important. We also spent a lot of time on this concept of re-subdivision potential. And you may or not be aware, but within the county, there are certain places that were zoned long ago, and they were zoned with very large lots, maybe because at the time they were on well and septic. But over time, these properties have new zoning applied to them that allow for a smaller lot than for which they currently are. And so in this image you see here, all the yellow parcels are the parent parcels, the oldest parcels when they were originally created. But you're seeing in certain neighborhoods where they're coming in and subdividing them, and it's called by right, meaning the zoning already allows this to meet the minimum requirements still. And you're seeing additional homes going in a place where there's already one home. You might see 2 or 3 homes now coming in, and they get creative on how they divide those up. Like you see the white lines are dividing larger parcels into smaller parcels. And many things are going on, and people have a lot of feelings, both pro and con, on this phenomenon. But this is one opportunity where if you were to put in some of the more missing middle, smaller format, it may fit in these neighborhoods. However, as we asked for feedback in the questions, you could see that there is some hesitation on this. And so it was preferring, from the survey response, they're saying, well, we might prefer they go more in those activity centers and things you're thinking about, those concentrated areas of development, and maybe don't make this the primary solution for increasing housing choices within the county. Now, sometimes that's just because you're reacting to the statement. And as I showed you in the earlier slide, it might come down to design. Sometimes you can disguise a multi-unit building to look just like the buildings that are around it and the like. So it might be that it's not the issue of the if or but for, but it's more about the design, right? And so that's something we'd like to talk about with you as we go through future meetings. We also talked about accessory dwelling units. And we posed this question to say, would you build one on your property? So it may not mean that that somebody's against the idea of ADUs. We were trying to find out, what is that pent up demand or the latent demand that might come about if ADUs were to become more flexible or more widespread. And you can see that, at least from the survey responses, there's still some hesitation to ADUs. And so it may come down, Candace, to what you talked about with education, right? And communication on how we do these things. But we need to think about that in our messaging. Paul, you had brought up the planned service area boundary. And so we also had some interaction with the community about the rural West and the future of the rural West. And this was taken in from many different viewpoints. One was about the activities already, about preserving farmland and what did that mean. We did pose questions and talk a little bit about the planned service area boundary and expanding it westward. I invite you also, if you go back to the HoCo by Design project website, there's an education piece that goes with what would happen and what would it take to move that line. So that's available to you as well. But we've been kind of talking about it in terms of if you do move it, on what conditions and for what reasons would it happen. And so at least from the broad general question of would you move the line, you can see that there's sentiment kind of on that right at that 50% range of some hesitation to do that. Some of that might be because we don't know why you would want to move it yet. And so we have to have the discussion of why you'd want to move it to then determine whether you should move it. But just so you know where sentiment stands right now, the planned service area boundary and where it's located is on the table for the discussion during the general plan. We also talked about activity centers when we posed these different decision points to the community. And you may or may not be aware, but over the last couple of general plans that have been written, this concept of concentrating development into defined activity centers that might be a mix of uses. They might have the principles of walkable design. So you either can live and walk in close proximity, or you can park once and have the ability to move around by foot once you get there. And so this concept of activity centers, we were asking if that still, has resolve, and is it still have a strong sentiment within the county? And as part of that, from a housing perspective, we asked, if you are going to build new apartments or condominiums and the like in the county, where do you think they would go? And a lot of people felt most comfortable that they should go into these activity centers. And so if we're going to think about the future of these concentrated areas of growth, development, in many ways redevelopment, just because of where the county is on its growth cycle, thinking about apartments and condominiums as part of that will be very important for the general plan. And then I also want to bring up, because I told you activity centers are supposed to have design principles about being walkable and have close proximity and the like. So we also asked people in terms of neighborhood amenities, what do you value most to be within walking distance of a home? And so we can take this from two different viewpoints as we go through our discussions together. Maybe where we put housing in terms of where we think it's best suited, we might want to look to see where these amenities are located to see how we can provide close-in opportunities. Or the opposite could be true. If we do find places that are very strategic or important to have new housing investments or different ideas and thinking, how do we have these things go along with it? How do we have proximity to these different uses within where we are looking at making housing investments as well? And then we also talked about Gateway. There's been a lot of interest in the Gateway area. Basically, we're talking about the area to the west of the quarry that's on Interstate 95 as a landmark. And right now it's an employment center. Most of the buildings are lower in scale. And some people have even used the term the last frontier. A lot of people think this is a concentrated area for development and future development for Howard County moving forward, and something that we need to think about in the general plan. And so as part of that, we talked to people about, what needed to be in there. And we got a lot of response about having residential development in this area. However, just to be upfront with everybody, there's also this concern about the impacts to infrastructure. So if you're going to put residential in here, how are we going to solve schools or all those kind of things as well? Go along with it. It's a very comprehensive and complicated discussion to have. But the Gateway area, we want to have some discussion with you about housing opportunities that we might have there, if that is a focus for redevelopment and growth in the future. And then finally here, this was one of the questions we got, which was, well, how do you get this stuff done, right? Because we might want to have that conversation with you as well. And so, again, we got a lot of variety and reactions to the different ways that were posed out there. So is it, like Jake was mentioning, with zoning and having greater flexibility with by right zoning for missing middle? Is it more about just allowing density bonuses in places if you're meeting certain criteria for missing middle housing? Do we have incentives? Do we need a new idea? You see, none of the above actually won out. So is there another idea we're not thinking about that we want to generate through our conversations with you? And then a lot of people just said, you know what, I need to learn a lot more. And so again, I go back to the communication, the messaging, and we want to make sure working with you, how do we get the word out properly when we're talking about these different opportunities and challenges for housing? So again, just more information in terms of what we're hearing from the community. There is tons and thousands of comments and things if you want to sift through them on the website. And so that's just stuff that's available to you in between meetings if you'd like it. Okay, so with that, I'd like to go back to having more of a conversation and more of a discussion among the group. And for this, it's the topics that we've identified so far that we think this advisory group would be most impactful or benefit most the work of the Planning Advisory Committee or the general plan as a whole. And so I want to review those quickly. And Mary, if you want to chime in on any of these, please do. We can just kind of co-discuss these. But we had four.
Go ahead and take the lead.
Go ahead, Mary, please.
Oh, I said go ahead and take the lead, Matt.
Okay. So we had four categories that we'd like to start out with and then expand them based on conversations we have this evening. And you can see we slipped in kind of a fifth one under the blue box as a two-parter. But these are the things that we thought we would pose to you as our needs from where we stand in the general planning process. We'd like to get some guidance and feedback from you. But then also today is about if we need to expand that list anymore, so that starting in our next meeting, we're really working on these things like action items. So I'm just going to go across from left to right, and with each column, I'm going to stop so we can have a little bit of conversation about them. So the first concept or idea that we want to bring to you is all about the missing middle, and really about the scale and the type of housing that should be in the county. And does it change based on location? So does it change in Columbia, Elk Ridge, the rural west, the southeast planning area? Do we have different conditions or different definitions for missing middle based on where we are in the county? And again, missing middle could be from more of a price point, but it's also from the type of housing that's provided. And so we want to talk about, again, the rural west, and we brought that up. And even if it's not moving the planned service area boundary, you know, now there's been a lot of discussion about shared septic systems and those kind of things. Does that need to come into play as well? This idea about the activity centers and where we might concentrate development. We talked about Gateway, but we might also be talking about transit-oriented development centers along the MARC line, or things along Route 1, or the village centers in Columbia. All of that is on the table in terms of if they are to introduce new or different residential in them, how can they help solve the missing middle question? I talked to you about the infill and the re-subdivision of lots, and you saw sort of where the sentiment of that was. So not only if we do it, but really how do you do it so it's contextual to the surrounding neighborhoods? And so let me stop there and see if I can get any insights from you that would hone in on this action item that we're going to post to you for the weeks to come.
Hey, Matt, this is Jackie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we've got you. Thank you.
Okay, great. So and as it relates to all the options that you've gone over, the 4 options, if at the end of the day, what the need is somewhere between 31,000 and 51,000 units of housing to make available, all options need to be on the table.
Yes.
And, you know, if it's in the rural west, being able to have to subdivide and to re-subdivide so that there are maybe more units on a parcel as opposed to contiguous townhomes, you know, that can be an option. Focusing density in activity center areas it's logical, it makes sense. You know, so everything that you've gone over is great. But one thing that I think that when we talk about housing, we also need to put on the table and be realistic about the access to that housing. And whether it's transportation. I know it's, you know, our focus is housing, but one thing that we lack within this county is transportation and equal accessibility to resources. So for instance, if we're looking at senior housing, right, as an option in one of these areas, you know, how are seniors going to get to the core? How are they going to get to their services and program? We want to encourage them to move about the county, but are we making sure that transportation is creating that accessibility? So that's something I just want to say that's in addition to the school issue, right? It's access to these units, and homeowners need public transportation as well as they get older, and our children need access to public transportation so that they can get around the county. So those are 2 important pieces. But I do think that all of these options need to be made available, and I think it's difficult when you are talking to folks who are not housing people to understand the nuances of what type of incentives or benefits, or how do you encourage that when they really don't want density? And I think that's going to be, I think that's the greatest challenge to overcome in the county that I've learned, is that folks, anything that compromises schools and rezoning or overpopulation, folks are very sensitive around those issues. But it's almost, how do we help create a cultural shift to accept these, this thought process that we have to figure out ways that we can welcome new people into this county, and making sure that folks have access to housing opportunities at different levels of affordability. It's a cultural shift, and I think that's the difficulty. And you can see that in the answers that you've received across the board. So again, just, you know, in summary, if we're trying to get to 51,000 units of housing, that's a lot of units. We're not DC, we're not Baltimore, where we can put, you know, all in one place or throughout the city and so forth. So we're going to have to utilize these resources in order to do it.
Agreed. Yes. There's been a lot of discussion within the general planning process of what I call just big enough, right? So how many of those units can and should fit here? So that's something that we'll be discussing probably all the way up to plan adoption, frankly. So it's good comments that you've had there. We need to continue that conversation. It's a good one. Other comments or reactions to that first column about kind of the missing middle concept we'd like to bring to you?
I'll speak a little. Oh.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, one of the things that we're struggling with, and I think that you're struggling too based on the data, is the fact that we're getting really, really large single family homes and townhouses that are not attainable to who we want them to be just because they're so large, but that's how the economics are working. And one of the things that we're working on scale is perhaps creating a way to limit unit size where single family homes will be capped at a certain amount, but if you build a duplex, you could get a gentle density bonus if you build 2 units. That's something that we're looking at. So that might be something you want to look at too. One question I do have is, what are the current zoning rules for missing middle? Is it allowed? And if so, how is it allowed? Is it by right or any other type?
Yeah, it's a good question because you get all the way to the fourth side, and we want to work through that with you a little bit as well. Mary, do you want to maybe give some initial reaction on the zoning question?
Yeah, well, so one thing that we're going to be inviting our division chief from the zoning division to a future meeting to get into what is currently allowed in our zoning regulations. But that's a great question. And if people have questions that we need to have answered at a future meeting, now is also the time to let us know what they are.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Again, this is Bruce.
Yeah, please.
And again, Lisa, I think, if you're going to see that we are where we came from, other than downtown Columbia, we're a very suburban oriented zoning district, and that's not surprising from where we came from. So there's a lot of opportunity to help with missing middle, assuming. But the other thing I just wanted to point out is I'm a real advocate of the idea of duplex, triplex, and I do think, and it's a little bit of a reaction to where we are, that multifamily, which obviously provides a lot of units, but right now, other than in these these activity centers, for me, the multifamily aspect, be it apartment or condo, is less of a solution than maybe it was 2 years ago. And so, in both rural west and infills, this idea of 2 for 1, 3 for 1, is kind of where I think the opportunity is.
Okay, great. Any other comments on the first column? Otherwise, I'll move to the second. Fran, I see you.
I guess I would like to know, my recollection from the survey, the 4 scenarios, was that if there was going to be an expansion of the planned service area, that it would be in southwest Howard County, because northwest Howard County has too much preservation land. Can someone kind of summarize, when you talk about the rural west, the rural west is not equal all along, and if someone knows more than I do, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. So it was scenario D as in David that you're mentioning, where it was the most aggressive, I'll put it that way, expansion of the planned service area boundary. And at that point, it was, again, to test theories and ideas. We got mixed reactions back to that as we showed you. And there's additional questions. If you go back to the guide and the scenario summary, you can see. It looks like there might be more strategic expansions that might be looked at, rather than just a very large expansion. But again, the process is still unfolding, so you don't really know. Certain areas are in different watersheds, and so we've looked at that as well. At least to the Montgomery County side, a lot of that is in the critical water supply watershed for Montgomery County. So we have to look at what development means to that as well. And we did hear a lot of sentiment about, there's been, I think it's $175 million invested in preserving farmland already and the like out there. And so it does create a place, Fran, where the rural West isn't all one entity, right? You've got different conditions going on with all over the place. And in some ways, it's interesting because if you were to just expand the PSA boundary, thinking you just extend water and sewer service lines, a lot of times you got to look at the cost benefit, because sometimes you have to run a line through an area that can't be served because it's preserved or something like that. And from a utility provider standpoint, as soon as I expand service, I want as many taps onto that service as possible to pay the debt service down on the expansion. So there is a lot going on. It's very complicated, I guess I'll put it that way. And so, we can talk about all those different issues and viewpoints as we go through our different meetings.
Thank you.
Matt, I'd like to offer one sort of a new idea.
Sure.
And it was something that Jake talked about, or at least it's what sparked the idea with me. I introduced myself as a local residential land developer. I've been doing this a long time. Mm-hmm. But I've begun to notice over the past, say, 10 years, there's a real stark difference between what we as developers are proposing to be built in the neighbor's backyard and the neighborhood in which those neighbors live. Most of them don't have sidewalks, they don't have curb and gutter, they don't have storm drain, they don't have stormwater management. And so the world is effectively passing them by. So it's not just the resentment, it's just not the, how can you build a house that big, 3,000 square feet? Our house is only 1,500. There is a collision of worlds there that the general plan is ignoring, has ignored. Because the plan, of course, is focused on growth and development, and should be. Mm-hmm. But I think we're missing an opportunity to do something about the existing residential areas that the county is unable or unwilling to do anything about through its capital projects. So I'm thinking there's a way we can use new growth in redevelopment areas that would address some of the community's infrastructure problems and provide for whether it's duplex or quadplex or even some small scale multifamily, but in a way to refresh an older neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Because if not, I'll simply wait for older neighborhoods to crumble and then I'll buy them at a bargain and then redevelop them.
Yeah, flip them up.
I don't think we go into a state of decline and declare an area blight before we do that.
Yep. It's a good comment. I won't take the time now, but the structure of how this general plan is being created, its organizational framework, does lend itself to having some of those conversations, which I think will be great. So stay tuned for more of that. But we'll discuss probably over the next couple of meetings some opportunities to even make that better through some of the ideas like you have as well, or neighborhood improvement programs and things like that. So. Other comments in either Josh or Sean? I don't want to ignore you as well just because I can't see you. So just break right into the conversation if you've got thoughts.
Thank you. This is Sean, and I apologize. I'm not looking at everything, so that's why I was trying to listen, absorb, and I'm not sure if I can, give proper context since I'm not looking at it. But one thing that I know has been raised a little bit, and I know that something that they did. I was following closely in Montgomery County a little over a year ago, and is the ADUs. And I live in Howard County. I actually had a client where he got dinged on having one of these, and it was a horrible process. He wasn't even able to ask for it. But so I understand the county. I haven't followed the county zoning as closely. I don't do a lot of work in Howard County, but I believe it's still a conditional use or very challenging and somewhat expensive to do those. Montgomery County totally rewrote their law to really, really encourage and make it very streamlined, very simple, so that, as was mentioned earlier, in-law suites or maybe families that have younger adult kids and keep the family together and the community together. I mean, that's something that just, it's not an ideal solution, what we're looking for here, but it is part of the solution. And I just think that we don't have to go too far in my mind to look at a really good model, which is what Montgomery County did. And really, they're still trying to, I think, let people know about it. And it essentially, I'm oversimplifying, it essentially almost allows anyone who has a single family lot to put one on with certain conditions. But it's very user friendly, family friendly. So that's something I think that, again, that's something that can be done without too much effort, and it could help here. Certainly not a big solution, but certainly could help. And I think that's hopefully something that Howard County will be looking at.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Good comment.
Matt, this is Paul Casey. I just wanted to add one additional thought to the options that we're talking about. I don't remember a specific mention of mixed use development, where we would invite the development of residential and commercial facilities together. And it seems to me that one of the things to think about when we're looking at strategic location is to look at areas maybe in the West where there already is some economic activity which has created an economic center, and consider those as areas where you could do some mixed use development, allowing particularly housing where you could have flats on top of retail, or some limited commercial. And we might be able to find ways to create incentives for doing that kind, at least for creating opportunities, because we want to encourage developers to look at that as a possible way of providing the services that people need at the same time that we can use existing locations. So I'd like to at least add a specific consideration of areas for mixed use development as part of our consideration.
Sure. Great. That'd be good. Any other thoughts or ideas, or I'll move us into the next column just to pace us, and we can always come back with some global comments at the end. The second one is an interesting one. As I told you, HoCo by design was kind of chosen on purpose because we are looking a lot at the physical organization, the design, the context, the character of the county in this version of the general plan. And it's always interesting because I think, Jacqueline, you had mentioned it in your comments where you were saying, people hear density and then they automatically jump to something, and it creates a reaction, whether it's positive or negative. And actually, in some projects we've been working on elsewhere in the country, we've been successful. We actually take density out of the general plan and we say that's a zoning issue. And we've been able to say, well, if you get the character right and the housing type or products right and all of that, in zoning, you can go ahead and set that number. But in the general plan, if you set it, then zoning's kind of locked into it. So I'm interested to hear, especially from those with the development experience as well. There's always this idea about, you want affordable housing, or you want to hit a certain price point, but then with the design controls on it, it's a game. It's a game of equilibrium, trying to meet the perfect world. And so I would like to see if this group would be interested to have some conversations in the meetings to come after this about, some of those ideas. Like I showed you the 3 different formats for a duplex and those kind of things. And so, beyond just talking about a density number in a table, but I'd really like to have this group and challenge you to think about what it looks like, how it's designed, whether it's the home or the neighborhood, as we go through. But let me ask if there's any reactions or thoughts on that concept.
Matt, briefly state the concept again, please.
Sure. So
summarize it.
Sure. So we'd like to speak with this group about going beyond just the number, or making the general statement of like, we need more townhomes, or we need more quadplexes, or whatever it ends up being. In this general plan, we're really trying to set a little more expectation around what it might take to be more accepting of some of these things. And usually it's design that gets you there. And so while a density number might elicit one reaction, if I show you what a duplex could look like, people are like, oh yeah, I want those all over the community. And so I want to see whether whether you all agree or disagree that the general plan should at least contemplate some of those things. And if they do, what types of topics do you think are important to that? You see, we threw a couple out there about like their design and format, whether there should be provisions put in place that where they land, you need to kind of look at what's around it and take design cues from what's around it. Or also this idea about transitioning in scale. So you don't put a 5-story, stick over podium kind of stacked apartment or condo right next to a single family home. Does there need to be a transition of housing types and the like? So that's the kind of stuff we were thinking about.
Got it. Thanks.
Yes.
And Matt, this is Paul again. I'll just echo what you said. I think that is important. I think that people have an image of what they consider to be housing that's multi-occupant housing, and it's often negative. Doesn't matter what it is, it's often negative. I can tell 2 quick stories, one of which is when Tom Carbo was the head of the Housing Commission, he would often get criticisms about developing Housing Commission properties. And he would take people who criticized it to visit Burgess Mills, which is in downtown Ellicott City, and say, this is an example of what we can develop. And people, when they saw it, realized this was attractive housing of choice that people would choose to live in. And so their image changed, and that helped people to consider whether or not a commission property might exist. But the other story I would tell is in our own neighborhood. I've lived in Dunlogan for the past 35 years. And there is a house on Chatham, which when you walk by it, looks like every other house in our neighborhood, which are single family detached. But if you notice, it has 2 mailboxes. It's 2 separate dwelling units, and you would not know. And I think that, there was initial controversy about it, but I think people accepted it because it fits the pattern of the neighborhood. So I do think it's important to consider that, particularly if we want to provide ways to expand in existing neighborhoods, like a Dunlogan neighborhood, where there could be opportunities to create duplexes or even triplexes, but they could certainly be designed in a way to integrate into the community so that they would be, so that they would not, they wouldn't violate what people's image would be of what they think should be, what is acceptable and not in the fabric of the community.
Yep. Thank you, Paul.
This is Bruce. I agree with Paul 100%. And I do think these design concepts are very, very important. And to make, just like Paul said, that so people can see that it can be done effectively and not disproportionately. I think, again, I don't want to, you talked about not be zoning, but the most frustrating thing for us as developers and builders is, again, our old subdivision regs, and we get a site and we got to keep the side yards to this and the backyards to that and this, those types of things just have to be looked at because they limit what you can do and even offer this design format. And it's funny to me that MXD, we can go to 3-foot or 0 side yards, but in RED, we still have 7.5-foot side yards or whatever, 15 foot apart. It just makes no sense to me because we're clustering. So we really got to, again, the whole idea of being able to provide more with less is really important. And again, the design format, I think you're right on it, Matt, with, we need to provide designs that are desirable and not terrible.
Yep. I do think it was interesting. I asked this question on purpose. I asked, and you'll see it in the Growth Choices workshop, I asked somebody to respond to all the different housing types they've lived in over their lifetime. And while single family detached homes was number 1, which is not a surprise given the county, apartments was number 2. And so for all the people who complain about multifamily, it seems like a lot of them used to live in there. And so in some ways, it's hard then to say we don't need any of that because they all needed it at some point in their life as well. So I do think it's a design issue that I would love to have that conversation as part of this group.
I agree. It's one of, we're a little bit farther ahead. So we've been talking in the community about what missing middle changes would look like in Montgomery County. And neighborhood compatibility is always the #1 concern. So we've, talked, there's lots of tools out there. There's pattern books, there's design guidelines that take out a lot of the uncertainty of the process and are also really helpful for not just developers, but also small developers that are, not able to get into the big projects that are common because they're so complicated and it requires a lot of expertise. So for us, it's also a little bit of an equity issue to make sure that the small developers can get into these infill types of development too. So I think pursuing things like pattern books and design guidelines is a really helpful way to achieve the product.
Yes, set the expectation. I agree.
Just to follow up on what Lisa said, in our zoning code and in our land development regulations, compatibility is what drives both. And when you can't be compatible, then distance is what is substituted.
That's right.
Including screening. And so if we're going to try to introduce different housing types into existing communities, we're going to have to change the distance requirement because we're going to have to change the housing type. So that pattern book approach is critical.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's interesting that, as you said, if you can't be compatible, just separate things. That's kind of what people have gotten to at this point. Other comments on this issue? Again, I throw it to either Josh or Sean on the phone as well to chime in. Otherwise, Sherman, go ahead.
Distance. Well, distance to Paul. Paul, I don't understand what you mean about distance. Things must change distance-wise. I don't. Are you saying that if the appearance or the fabric of a certain part of the community does not match the kind that you want to put there, you got to move this off-site? I don't understand.
If I use the word setback, would that help you, Sherman?
You use what?
Setback.
I'm sorry.
If I'm
Give it to me again.
If I'm doing a detached home next to a detached home, I don't need a big setback. That's not required by the code. But if I'm doing an attached home next to a detached home, suddenly the rules require that I have a much deeper setback because we can't have detached next to attached. That's against the code. So that's the distance I'm talking about.
Okay. I understand. Thanks. That makes sense.
Any last comments? Otherwise, I want to make sure the first thing you always, rule of thumb on your first meeting is always end on time, right? So I'd like to move on to the next one, but Jacqueline, go ahead. I see you've gone green, please.
Oh, no. I was waiting for the next one. That's all.
Okay. All right. So the third column that we have here, again, it's a little bit of a two-parter. And here where, Lisa, we'd love to hear, more stories about what you've gone through and elsewhere. So we're trying to see what has been successful elsewhere. Some people have already identified Montgomery County to the point we wanted to hear firsthand and often. But are there other areas we need to look at and study in terms of good examples? And then also, as we look at those examples, we're going to find that the jurisdiction's role is different in all of those different locations. Sometimes the county might be just more of an advocate and an enabler, a uniter, a partner maker. Other places it's regulatory, and that's how they try to institute change. Sometimes they're even funding. I tell the story here in Charlotte, where I'm located, that we pass bonds every 2 years for affordable housing, general obligation bonds, and then that money is used to supplement or augment development applications that come in to help them be affordable, or to set aside a certain number of units to be affordable as part of the initiative. So there's actually a direct funding contribution that's made for affordable housing. So we want to, and this is what I was telling you in the beginning, not just stay in our box, but think outside the box about how best we solve these issues moving forward for Howard County in the 20 years. And so if you have example areas that we should look at, we'd love to hear them so we can go kind of create like a case study about that condition and learn what they did and how they got there. So thoughts or reactions to that initiative that we want to have with you?
Matt, it's Bruce. I mean, I think Montgomery County is the best example in terms of recent changes. But I also would ask you and the other consultants, I think, you know, we're not necessarily familiar with other parts of the country and what perhaps they are successful at. We certainly can know that in the Bay Area, that's not very successful right now. But maybe it is. But I would hope you could bring some of those to our attention.
Yes, we definitely will. I just want to see if there's any already that you want me to look into. We'll add that to our list. But yes, Bruce, there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and we're going to try to show you through the lens of whether they were an advocate, a regulator, or a funding partner, because even that's different wherever you go in the country.
This is Jackie again. What I think is important and just a value add here is anytime you're looking at affordability and what are the points that you control or influence so that you're creating greater ranges are, two areas that I think that the county or any locality can be engaged in. One is looking at existing properties that they have control over to control acquisition costs. I think is one piece. And, construction costs, are pretty much set within the market. And so that's something that you can't necessarily control. But adding additional subsidy to help underwrite, whether it's a home ownership project, and making sure that those, you can underwrite the home prices, I think is another way that the county should be active within that as an active partner in that. So when you're looking at funding, it's like, how can they control acquisition costs? How can they contribute subsidy on an ongoing basis to underwrite the cost and make it more affordable? Are there any long-term covenants or restrictions that the county would continue to further? I know we have a pretty decent MIHU program, but can we go deeper? Can we do more? And it requires a longer-term, more predictable commitment by the county. I think is going to be very important. And as it relates to other places, I mean, all the high-cost areas. If you think of Howard County as a high-cost community, whether it's San Francisco, whether it's New York, they have set aside and provided resources to make sure that they can really control and make all of their resources available as the resource. So again, what does the city have? What does the county have in inventory? What are underutilized sites that are existing across the county? If it's schools that are underutilized, you can do mixed use and have schools on the ground floors to increase density with housing above. I just think it's look at the inventory, put it out there. You can control that acquisition cost, and then have a predictable subsidy so that you can underwrite and create greater affordability.
Yep. Good thoughts.
This is Paul. Just to emphasize what Jackie just said, a critical element in making the downtown Columbia housing plan successful was that every single one of the multifamily mixed income developments that will be developed is on land, with one exception. The land is being contributed to the Housing Commission for the development of those properties. There will be housing units built above a library, housing units built above a fire station, housing units built above a transit center, housing units built above above the cultural center. This is all a great use of mixed use and of the use of land, because it takes, in each case, it takes the cost of the land out of the development of the affordable housing element. And also the fact that we do mixed income development allows for income from the market rate units to help in subsidizing the cost of the lower units. So that's also a good thing to consider. And there are two questions that I had in mind that I'd like to ask Mary when she asked us if there were questions that we should bring back or that could be answered. One is, what does the county have in its regulations, zoning and planning regarding mixed use development? Are there restrictions on what can be done? And are there special would we need to make special changes in order to be able to permit mixed-use development, either as a matter of right or to change existing commercial properties so they can have residential. And the other thing is, Jackie just mentioned a very good point, which was the use of county land. And I'm not familiar with all of the requirements regarding the disposition of county land or identifying areas of the county where the county owns land that could be used for housing. But I thought that's a very good idea. And so maybe we could at least have us be aware of where there might be land available that the county has, or where the county could develop or encourage the development of a mixed-use facility. I know that in connection with the development of the Flyer Building in downtown Columbia, there were prohibitions about its being used at all for mixed-use development to include residential, which was a disappointment, I think, to the housing affordability community. But we need to understand what restrictions there are on mixed-use development or using county land for mixed-use and or residential development. So I'd like us to at least get information answering those two questions.
Okay. Great. Yeah, definitely.
I'll chime in here a little bit. I think that the two questions go hand in hand, because I would say Montgomery County has been most successful recently with our ADU update that someone mentioned. And success was because, one, we had the political will, and we also did, I think the planning department played the role of advocate. And we did a lot of research and answered a lot of the community concerns where there were questions about, student impact on schools. So we pulled student generation rates of existing accessory dwelling units. There were concerns about reducing the parking requirement. So we contacted the MVA to get parking registration data. We, looked at a lot of the concerns that were coming up and were able to play that role of advocate, which I think was successful. And it also was just an incremental change over a 5-year period where it started as a special exception conditional use, and slowly it changed to now accessory dwelling units are allowed by right for detached and attached structures. And so I think, there's something there about setting expectations and, continually working to get to a better result was also really helpful. Other jurisdictions that we're looking at are Portland with their infill residential development, which has been really helpful for guiding us. I think they are going through a lot of the same concerns. And of course, Minneapolis, their comprehensive plan, I think, set the baseline of what you can do for missing middle and comprehensive plan. So I think those are two really good resources.
Yeah, it's interesting. If I haven't mentioned it already, we also have the ability to bring in like some guest speakers and the like from time to time during these meetings we're going to have together. And it is interesting. We work with a woman who was involved in Minneapolis and actually in Grand Rapids, Michigan, rewrote their zoning ordinance to where residential zoning allowed up to quads by right. And I'm like almost fascinated nationally how many people are talking about that now. And I know Maryland had an experience with that a couple of years ago in their state legislature as well. But getting into that last column a little bit, we are going to look at those examples outside and sometimes far away from Howard County for the best examples. So yes, for sure. Let me, if you don't mind, I'd like to just continue on, again, respecting your time on here. And we answered a lot of these questions already. And Paul, you had mentioned some other data and questions that you had. So I'll ask if there's just any other data requests that you all have to please go ahead and voice them. But while you're doing that, I'm going to also bring up the future meeting dates that we've been contemplating based on how you all responded to the survey. So Mary, do you want to go over kind of the future meetings for this group?
Yeah, so I was trying really hard to accommodate everybody's schedule because, as you can see, all of you are providing really, really wonderful ideas, thoughts, and eventually, we'll develop some recommendations. So everybody pretty much for the June 24th, July 8th, and July 22nd meeting, 5 to 7 p.m. is a good time, except Jackie, I know on July 8th, looks like you're not available. Perhaps you're taking a well-deserved vacation. But on Thursday, May 27th, that's the one where I'm just trying to find a good time for everyone. I was wondering, could we potentially start from 5:30 to 7:30? Because I know, Josh, you have some difficulty making it on time for 5 p.m. But then Candace just mentioned she's not available. So my question is, two questions. Would you like to meet from 5:30 to 7:30? Would that accommodate everybody's schedule? Or do you want me to consider another time? Like, do we want to meet in the morning and have breakfast and coffee together? Say, you know, you tell me what time is your breakfast and coffee.
I'm up late at night writing, so 5 o'clock is fine. 5:30 p.m. is fine with me. But if everybody else wants to meet in the morning, that's fine. I'll get up.
It's only for the Thursday, May 27th meeting.
Yeah. Well, I go along with the rest of the group.
Thank you, Sherman.
Mary, that's the same evening that the Community Foundation is having their spring party event.
Oh.
So that's a conflict for me. So the breakfast sounds a lot better.
For May 27th? Okay.
Yeah.
I would also say breakfast is better.
Okay. What time's and then I know, Fran, how about you?
I'm usually kind of busy in the morning. If it's not too early, it'll work out.
Okay. Paul, Casey?
The morning would be fine, preferably anytime after 9 o'clock, 9 or later.
Okay. Lisa, May 27th, 9 a.m.
That works.
Okay. And what about Paul Ravel? It looked like you had some conflicts that day.
I think I can do the morning.
Okay. And then Josh or Sean, are you on the phone still? Okay, they may have had to leave. I think I kind of remembered them telling me they may have to jump early. I'll send them an email.
Yeah, I don't know if we have either caller right now, Mary, Josh, or Sean. Mary, I lost your audio. Can you go on and off? Mary, audio. Mary, can you? Yeah, I can't. Yep.
Can you hear me yet?
Yes. Yep. We have you.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I was just saying, I will confirm with those who are off the call now that Thursday, May 27th, to see if it can be from 9 to 11. But then the June 24th, July 8th, and July 22nd meetings, those will be 5 to 7. And I'll send out those meeting invites ASAP so you have a hold on your calendar.
Fantastic.
All right. Thank you all for your patience with our scheduling.
All right. We're 3 minutes into overtime. So I think we can end it here unless there's any concluding remarks. You can see we'll be together now in the morning of the 27th. We will start to gather our content and react to some of the comments you've already had to kind of continue us moving forward towards those 4 big topics that we were talking about earlier today.